Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the presentation of the Q4 2020 Labour Force Survey, or LFS, results. My name is Jim Dalton, and I'm a statistician in the CSO's Labour Market Analysis area with responsibility for the LFS. Let me start by saying that the methodology in the information note published beside the Q2 LFS results last August still applies. The link to the information note is shown on screen now, and a link to the information note is also provided in the LFS release for Q4 2020 on the CSO website. COVID-19 continues to have a very significant impact on data collection for the LFS. The suspension of all face-to-face household interviewing last March is still in force, and therefore, like Q3, all LFS interviews for Q4 were carried out by telephone. Households selected to be included in the LFS sample received introductory letters by post, asking them to ring to schedule an interview. The LFS and other household surveys give us a picture of the economic and social situation of the citizens of Ireland in a way and with a level of accuracy that no one else can gain. If you were asked to take part in the CSO survey, please do so. It means that when CSO figures are quoted, you know they're accurate because you told us. The LFS is published using the International Labour Organization, or ILO, definitions of employment, unemployment and inactivity. These are the international standard, and under EU regulation, the CSO is obliged to compile labour market estimates from the LFS according to these concepts and definitions. The LFS results published today for Q4 2020 have been compiled in the standard way. The CSO began publishing COVID-19 adjusted estimates of unemployment as part of the monthly unemployment estimates release for March 2020. The latest COVID-19 adjusted unemployment estimates from March 2020 to January 2021 inclusive were published on the 3rd of February last. The estimates for the end of December 2020 and the end of January 2021 are included in the LFS release today. These measures should be considered as the upper bound for unemployment. The CSO has now been making available COVID-19 adjusted employment estimates as part of the LFS release since Q1 2020. COVID-19 adjusted employment volumes and rates have been made available today in the LFS release for the end of December 2020 and January 2021. These should be considered as the lower bound for employment. Separate to the LFS, we're also publishing today the 5th in the series of Labour Market Insights Bulletin style releases. The data presented is sourced from the LFS and administrative datasets. These outputs are designed to provide high-level supplementary labour market analysis to users alongside the current outputs and metrics. The bulletin being published today is specifically designed to give some additional context and insight to the LFS results for Q4 2020. Before I present the results for Q4, let me first remind you of the ILO definitions used in the LFS. Taking employment first, and a person aged 15 years or more is classified as employed if during the reference week he or she worked for 1 hour or more for payment of profit, including work on the family farm or business, or if they were away from work during the reference week but had a job to return to. A person aged 15 to 74 years is classified as unemployed if during the reference week he or she was not employed, had taken active steps to seek employment in the previous 4 weeks, and is available to start work in the 2 weeks after the reference week. Finally, a person aged 15 years or more is classified as inactive if he or she does not fulfil the conditions for being either employed or unemployed. Specific rules govern the ILO status of persons who are temporarily laid off from their job depending on the degree of attachment to the job. This impacts the labour market status as follows. A person is classified as still being employed if the expected period of absence is within 3 months, or if the person continues to be paid at least half their wage or salary, where the period of absence extends beyond 3 months. A person is classified as unemployed if the expected period of absence is more than 3 months or unknown, and if the person is receiving less than half their wage or salary from their employer, and they have taken active steps in the previous 4 weeks to find work and are available for work within the 2 weeks after the survey. If If the person fails to meet the conditions for being unemployed, he or she will be classified as inactive. Moving now to the headline numbers, and using the standard ILO criteria, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 years and over in employment stood at 2,306,200 in Q4 of 2020, with an associated employment rate of 67.8% for those aged 15 to 64 years. At the end of December 2020, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of employment, or lower bound of the number of persons aged 15 years and over in employment, is estimated to have been 1,970,609, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted employment rate of 57.5% for those aged 15 to 64 years. Using the standard ILO criteria again, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed in Q4 stood at 138,900, with an associated unemployment rate of 5.7% for those aged 15 to 74 years. At the end of December 2020, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of unemployment, or the upper bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who are unemployed, was 468,655, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted unemployment rate of 19.4% for those aged 15 to 74 years. Finally, the ILO defined labour force was 2,445,100, with an associated participation rate of 61.3%. Those not in the labour force totaled 1,546,600. The labour force results presented today may not show the full impact that would have been expected from COVID-19. This may be partially due to the application of the ILO criteria for persons who were away from work during the reference week, but had a job to return to, or those who had lost their job. Many of those persons who are either classified or as employed or failed to meet the criteria for being classified as unemployed and would therefore have been defaulted to being inactive. Under the LFS methodology, all persons away from work in the reference week due to reasons other than being temporarily laid off were deemed to have an attachment to the job and therefore are classified as employed. Such reasons for absence would include family leave, holiday leave, for example. Majority of persons who were on temporary layoff for Q4 2020 expected to return to work within 3 months, or received at least half their wage or salary, and so were classified as employed. The pie chart on slide 18 profiles those persons who were classified as out of work in Q4, but had not worked since before the end of March, when the full effects of public health restrictions started to take effect. While 10.4% were classified as unemployed, but just over 3/4 of those persons were available for work, but not seeking work. The CSO were able to link the LFS data for Q4 with revenue data in respect of recipients of the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, or the EWSS, and the Department of Social Protection data for those in receipt of the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, or the PUP. This linking of data was done in accordance with CSO data matching protocols. The criteria for linking the data this quarter is based on whether the respondent was in receipt of the PUP or the EWSS at any time in the quarter. In previous quarters, the matching exercise was based on persons being in receipt of those supports in the interview reference week. The change in methodology this quarter is because the CSO don't currently have an EWSS dataset available that is based on the individual weeks of Q4 2020 in which a person was in receipt of the EWSS. Instead, we just have the data available on whether they were in receipt of EWSS at any stage in Q4. When the ILO criteria was applied to the match data, 63.4% of persons in receipt of PUP at any time in the quarter were classified as employed. 11.5% were classified as unemployed, while 25.1% were classified as inactive. A higher proportion of EWSS recipients at 87.2% were classified as employed, while 2.6% were unemployed and 10.1% were classified as inactive. This and some further information on EWSS and PUP recipients are available in the Labour Market Insights Bulletin, which has also been published by the CSO today. The table on slide 20 tracks the changes in ILO status between Q3 2020 and Q4 2020 for males, females and all persons who were interviewed in both quarters for the LFS. On the left is the ILO status of persons in Q3, while across the top is the ILO status for Q4. Taking those who were employed in Q3 first, the table shows that a high proportion of respondents classified as employed in Q3 at 91.91% were also classified as employed in Q4. The share of males and females are of similarly high proportions. A similarly high proportion at 91.5% of those who were inactive in Q3 were also inactive in Q4. And again, this was comparable for males and females. However, a different picture emerges for those who were unemployed in Q3. Only 31.5% of those persons were still classified as unemployed in Q4, while 31.4% were classified as employed and 37.1% were classified as inactive. Males who were unemployed in Q3 were more likely than females to be either employed or unemployed in Q4. Of those who were unemployed in Q3, 45.3% of females became inactive in Q4 compared to just 31.2% of males. Returning now to employment, and slide 22 compares the annual change in employment with the annual change in the number of persons away from work and the annual change in the average total hours worked in each week. In Q4, employment fell over the year by 55,000 or 2.3% to just over 2.3 million, and the fall in part-time employment accounted for virtually all of this change. However, the number of persons who were away from work in the reference week increased by 70.5% to nearly 325,000 over the year. The reasons for absence would include, for example, temporary layoff due to slack work, family-related leave and holidays. As explained earlier, these persons were classified as employed under the ILO criteria in Q4. The extent of these absences from work during the reference week resulted in an annual decrease of 8.5% or 6.6 million in the total number of hours actually worked per week, which stood at 70.8 million hours in Q4. The table on slide 23 presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage share of total employment for each sector by quarters, 3 and 4 of 2019 and 2020. The differing impacts of public health restrictions are very evident from the table. Some sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fishing, industry and information and communications were not overly affected either in Q3 or Q4 of 2020. However, the adverse effect of the pandemic has continued through both quarters for other sectors, and some notable examples are the accommodation and food services sector, where the rate of absence was 22.3% in Q3 of last year and 39.3% in Q4. This compares to rates of 5.8% and 7% respectively for the same quarters in 2019. The transportation and storage sector, where the rate of absence was 20.5% and 16.9% respectively in Q3 and Q4 of 2020, compared to 9.2% and 6% for the corresponding quarters in 2019. The other activities sector, which includes art, sports, entertainment and cultural activities, where the rate of absence in Q3 of 2020 was 13.6% and 30.1% in Q4 2020, compared to a rate of 7.8% for each of the same quarters in 2019. The bar chart on slide 24 just compares the percentage share of employment in each sector accounted for by absences from work during the reference week for Q4 2019 and Q4 2020. Again, the Labour Market Insight series bulletin published today contains further information on the percentage share of absences in each sector. The bar chart on slide 25 compares the number of hours worked per week expressed in millions by economic sector for Q4 in 2019 and in 2020. In Q4 2020, the number of hours worked in several sectors were close to Q4 2019 levels, and some of these sectors, such as public administration and information and communications, would be less likely to be impacted by the pandemic. However, as indicated in the earlier slide, the accommodation and food services sector, other activities sector, and the transportation and storage sector recorded the highest percentage share of employment with regard to absences in Q4 of 2020. This is reflected in the chart where the hours worked in Q4 for these sectors is significantly lower than the levels from a year earlier. Again, the bulletin published today contains further information on hours worked. Turning now to the economic sectors, unemployment fell in 7 of the 14 economic sectors over the year. The greater rates of decrease were in the administration and support services sector, which was down by 26,800 or 30,000. The accommodation and food services sector was down by 25.7% or 46,100. The other activities sector, which includes art, sports, entertainment and cultural activities, was down by 15.3% or 18,100. And finally, the construction sector was down by 7.3% or 10,700. The greater rates of increase, on the other hand, were in the information and communications sector, which was up by 9.3% or 11,800, and the financial, insurance and real estate activities sector, which was up by 8.1% or 9,300. Turning now to employment by gender, and male employment fell by 28,000 or 2.2% over the year, while female employment was down by 27,100 or 2.5% over the year. Full-time employment remained virtually unchanged over the year at just over 1,871,000, while part-time employment fell by 58,000 or 11.8% over the year to just under 435,000. The fall in part-time employment was much more prominent among females, who accounted for nearly 3/4 of the annual fall of 58,000. The graph on the slide charts the annual volume changes in full-time and part-time employment by quarter over the last 5 years. Part-time underemployment was 104,100 and accounted for 23% of total part-time employment in quarter 4 of 2020. The number of self-employed persons and the number of employees both fell over the year. Self-employment fell by 1.6% and employees fell by 2.5%. When adjusted for seasonal factors, employment stood at nearly 2,298,000 in quarter 4 of 2020, and that was up marginally from nearly 2,293,000 in the previous quarter. The graphic on the slide shows the quarter-on-quarter change over the past 5 years. Turning now to unemployment, as I mentioned earlier, using the standard ILO definition, the unemployment rate was 5.7% in quarter 4 of 2020. The numbers unemployed stood at 138,900 in quarter 4, and this was up by 25.6% from a year earlier. The graphic on the slide charts the trend in unemployment over the past 5 years. In volume terms, there were 77,200 males and 61,700 females classified as unemployed. Male unemployment was up by 24% over the year, and female unemployment was up by 27.6%. The long-term unemployment rate, that is persons unemployed for 12 months or longer, was down from 1.6% to 1.5% in quarter 4 2020 from a year earlier. There were 36,800 persons classified as long-term unemployed in quarter 4, and this accounted for 26.5% of all unemployed. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate fell from 6.5% to 6% over the quarter. In volume terms, the seasonally adjusted number of persons unemployed was down by 7.9% or 12,700 over the quarter to 146,500 in quarter 4. We've included on the slide a graph charting the trend in the rate over the past 5 years. Turning now to the labour force, and the total number of persons in the labour force in quarter 4 was down by 1.1% or 26,700 over the year to just over 2,445,000. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 22,200 and a negative participation effect of 48,900. On a seasonally adjusted basis, the labour force decreased slightly over the quarter to just over 2,438,000 in quarter 4 2020. The table on slide 39 shows annual estimates for some key labour market indicators of 2020 and the comparable figures for 2018 and 2019. These figures were estimated by taking the average of the 4 quarters for each year. While employment was down by 1.2% between 2019 and 2020, absences from work in the reference week virtually doubled over the same period to nearly 348,000. This resulted in a fall of 9.6% to 70 million in the average number of hours worked per week in 2020. Unemployment increased by 13% to 136,700 between 2019 and 2020, and this combined with the fall in employment led to a slight fall in the labour force to 2,431,000 in the same period. This completes the data element of the presentation this morning. And moving on now to details of some forthcoming releases from the Labour Market and Earnings Division of the CSO. The earnings and labour costs release for quarter 4 2020 will be published on the 2nd of March next, as will be the 6th in the series of labour market insight bulletins. The monthly unemployment estimates and live register figures for February 2021 will be published on the 3rd and the 5th of March respectively. The results for the quarter 1 2021 LFS are likely to be delayed due to work associated with the new regulation, and further updates will follow in due course on this. Further topics and release dates for the Insight series will also be confirmed in due course. And as always, users should check the CSO release calendar for upcoming releases. We've mentioned in previous briefings about the new integration of European Social Statistics, or YES regulation, which has come into force from the 1st of January this year. This covers various social statistics themes, including the labour market. We'd like to remind users that in terms of the LFS, the new regulation will include changes to the LFS questionnaire with the addition of some new variables. It will also include the removal of some existing variables and changes to others. In addition, there will be changes in the availability of other variables which will be only available on an annual or biennial basis, rather than the current quarterly basis. You'll find a link to the LFS questionnaires on the CSO website included in the slide on this presentation. The changes to be made under YES will result in a possible break in series for the LFS in countries across Europe in 2021. The YES mandates for the elimination of breaks for 14 different series back to 2009, and these are summarised in the slide. The CSO will be required to provide these break-free series to Eurostat by the end of this year. For Ireland, the changes required under YES are much less substantial than for other member states, who have more significant sampling and methodological changes to apply. To inform the break-free series exercise, the CSO has carried out a pilot parallel survey of the existing LFS questionnaire and the new YES compliant LFS. The data from this pilot is being analysed at present, and depending on the outcome of this analysis, some backcasting of the existing series may be required. This work will be completed prior to the release of the LFS results for quarter 1 2021, and as already mentioned, users should note that this may result in a delay in the publication of these results. The labour market team in the CSO will of course engage further with users in advance of the publication of these YES compliant results for quarter 1 2021. So in summary, the results for quarter 4 2020, like previous quarters, have been compiled according to ILO definitions and concepts. The effect of COVID-19 continues to be apparent from the results. Over the year to quarter 4 2020, employment fell by 55,000, while unemployment increased by 28,300. The effect of increased public health restrictions over the quarter was also evident. In quarter 4 2020, seasonally adjusted employment was only marginally higher than in quarter 3, while unemployment fell by 12,700. The average number of hours worked each week in quarter 4 2020 was 70.8 million hours, down by 8.5% or 6.6 million hours per week from a year earlier. The results show that for a number of economic sectors, the hours worked were close to Q4 2019 levels. But for others, the considerable adverse effect of the pandemic has continued. Finally, absences from work during the reference week were nearly 325,000 in quarter 4 2020, compared to nearly 299,000 in quarter 3 of 2020 and just under 191,000 in quarter 4 of 2019. This concludes the presentation on the results for the LFS results in quarter 4 2020. Thank you.